a father hunger. And right here, Paul is saying God passes forth this hunger through us to where we're crying out in our spirits, Abba, Daddy, Father. This is natural. This is natural language for us. That when we become his sons, we're adopted in, we're grafted in through the adoption process of the cross, the hunger starts, and we cry out in our spirit. 1 John 3:1. See how great a love the Father has bestowed on us, that we would be called his children, the children of God, and such we are. These are all New Living Translation, by the way. The only acceptable version. I'm kidding, guys, I'm kidding. That's heresy. I'll have to answer to Steve for that later. New King James, but no, these are all New Living. So I want to go through real quick, kind of the title here of my Devo, Sonship and Elephants. So I've always kind of been fascinated with them. Elephants, largest mammal on earth. And largely, we've had understanding that they're herds and those things, memories, right? They live 70 years. They're very social animals. We've actually learned a lot about their social habits. We've drawn some parodies between us and them. But it's largely a matriarchal society. So the grandmother is the woman. She's taking the herds through and protecting them, showing them the routes, and she's preserving the generational knowledge that passes down. And you're like, well, this is a guy's class. This isn't Shine. Fair enough. So here's what happened, is that the bull elephants, up until recently, have been largely misunderstood. And this is where the challenge comes in for us, is that up until about 14 years old, they stay in their own family and herd, and then they break off, and they start to go explore and be in other families and other herds, kind of bouncing around that way until about 25. And then they do kind of head out into the wilderness, and they've thought largely to be isolated, loners, and aggressive. But studies as recent as of 6 years ago, what they found, because they were fascinated on the larger herd, and it was easier to study, and they were like, wow, man, these guys are amazing animals, and the grandmother's leading them, and this is how this works. But what they found in the last 6 years is that males at the age of 25 go out and seek other adult males that are older, that have broken away from the herd, and they make their own smaller herds. And there's something that's passed through by these older elephants who have walked through, and there's these smaller male communities, and they're giving them the skill sets. They're giving them the tools that they need to be out there away from the larger herds, because they are walking in smaller packs, and they can walk a little bit faster. They don't have to wait for the young. And there's this fathering that's taking place that we didn't even realize until recently. We thought these were just lone rangers, aggressive males, and wanted to be isolated. Well, really, there's a pretty tight community. And they said that when these males come to watering holes, it's actually more of a social experience than it is when the women bring the other herds, the larger herds, to those watering holes. They say that these guys will come around, and there's just this physical connection. There's this intimacy, and they're like trying to touch each other with their ears and their trunks, and there's just this proximity of affection and intimacy that they're experiencing. And I think it shocked the scientists that they had missed this, and it was fascinating for me to read, and I'm going, well, here's something here that God is showing us in nature. And for me, I grew up, I love history shows. I was a history major in college, and I love like nature shows. I love learning about animal kingdom and what all that looks like, and just what can we learn from them, God's creation, his fingerprint, what we were put here to control, subdue, and rule as men. And so going through that, I watch a lot of animal shows. My kids will come down, and they're like, oh my gosh, Dad, can we watch something else, please? Oh my gosh, not another National Geographic show. But I'm like, come on, man, it's sharks, dude. They're gonna eat something awesome. And but yeah, and whether it's some guy grabbing some big snake out of a bush or wrestling alligators, I love watching nature and seeing God's design, because I think it can help explain some things in our world too. And so it landed pretty hard on me when I saw how male elephants interact. These guys, these adolescents come back at 25, and there's this inherent desire and need to be fathered, to be shown the ropes, shown the way. And so I think there's something here for all of us, men. And I want to just say that in the beginning, for me, God put on this thing where I saw this void landscape of us. We love our kids. We're in the Christian community, but we're not intentional about fathering them some ways where other cultures are. Other cultures in different communities in other countries are very intentional. African tribes will pull their sons away. They'll actually go and they'll stand outside of the hut and they'll call the boy out. And he has to intentionally leave his mother's hut and come out. And there's a group of men out there from the tribe. And once he steps into that sacred circle, he's then begun his journey into his masculine process. And he will then spend the next several years learning from the other adult males in the tribe. And I don't know if they picked that up from the elephants or what, man. And maybe it's inherent in them. But they're modeling what's happening and what we see in nature too. Most of us here have probably seen Sparta or 300. And in the opening scene, we play some of those movie clips at our advances. But, he's talking about the boy and the agoge. And that's the process where on the precipice of puberty from a male from 12 to 13, the boy leaves his mother at that point, and he lives full on with the guys. And back in Spartan days, males would live separately in kind of like barrack-style stuff, and they would live apart from their wives and the women, and they would invite them, the same process. They would invite these guys into the warrior experience. They're going to start their training, and we're going to leave the ways of mom now, and I'm going to show you the ways of the man. And so all of this was stirring in me, and God was putting something in me. I started reading books, reading other guys who were doing this process in our community because it's not completely void. There are guys out there doing this. Eldridge talks about it. The guy you have talk about legacy, Chuck Stecker, Craig Glass, who's local in our community here. I've met with Craig several times. He's a great guy. Love his heart. Even in our own community, not to the same degree, and I think Terry Tyson is doing a great study on hearing the Father's heart and being fathered, and just I've heard awesome things about it. So if you have questions, see Lee, check it out. Love what Terry's doing. But so herein begins this concept of, okay, I don't need to recreate the wheel, but I want to create a process here at the road for guys and dads to go through it. And equally, moms and daughters would be doing it on their side too, because there's a value to initiating the feminine heart as well. But today I want to talk about the masculine heart, guys. And so the question that every boy asks, and every dad I talk to that becomes a new dad, everybody, it's all the same. Dads that start with girls and they only have girls, and then they get the boy, or they start with a boy and then they have the girl. There's always this obvious nature built-in instinct. And I was talking to a youth pastor who was over at Rock Family, and we were having lunch last week. And he's like, yeah, I have 2 daughters in like high school, junior high, and then I got this 2-year-old boy. I'm going, oh. He's like, yeah, no, it's a miracle kid. I'm like, awesome, okay. It wasn't just a hot night in, Valentine's evening or something. But no, he's like, no, man, it was a God-given son. We were praying for him. And he goes, and man, what a difference. He's like, my daughter would just kind of sit there and color, and then my son just walks over and everything's a hammer or a gun or a sword. He's like, and I didn't teach him that. I'm going, yeah, it's built in, man. It's built in, right? It's in our DNA. And so there's something that we even start to look at as boys, maybe even before cognizant understanding comes in, and we start thinking about, am I strong enough? Am I brave enough? Do I have what it takes? Am I courageous? And so those questions have to be answered. And so that developed the Forge for us, what we call the Forge, and it's this 8th grade program where dads and sons walk together for a semester. And our core passage is 1 Corinthians 13:11. When I was a child, I thought as a child, I spoke as a child. When I became a man, right, I put away childish things. The concept here is that as kids, we look to Dad's tool shed, at that process in our heart, whether we're being called out of our huts or whether we have that desire to leave mom and cling to Dad's world and go in and understand and adventure in his space. We want to understand the tool shed. We want to understand knives and guns and how cars work and all those things. What's Dad interested in? Because that's what I want to kind of get to know now. And so there's this natural transition that happens for us. And so our process involves very intentional benchmarks where we have a father's blessing. It culminates at the end of the semester, and we're blessing our kids. And dads, and oftentimes, it's been my experience, and I'm going to raise my hand on this, is that we as fathers hadn't experienced this. So how do you give away what you haven't experienced yourself? We have to experience it. And so a lot of times in those semesters, I'll get the dads together, and we'll have father's blessings on them first, because they can't give a blessing if they haven't received it. I didn't get my first father's blessing until I was in my late 20s. It was from my father-in-law's dad, because my dad had already passed away. But I'm down at Phoenix First Assembly, Tommy Barnett's church, like 8,000 people. We're doing our kind of man's ceremony. Ed Cole, it was, Maximize Manhood. And I know, Vince, you know him very well, and his son now. But went through that process, and at the end of it, they did this thing where, we get knighted on stage by the pastor, and then they pray a father's blessing over us. Man, it was like, it was foreign to my heart, to my mind at first. But the words that were spoken in that prayer were native tongue to my heart's soil, and I'm going, whoa, man, how have I never heard of this? How have I never experienced this before? And there was power there, and there was something transferred in that process, guys, that if you haven't, and if you want one, if you have a dad that's still on this earth and you would want to do that, there's something special about your paternal earthly father, if there's a relationship there, to get that from him while he's here. If there's not, we have pastors. We're going to probably, I've been talking with Steve, we want to do one here at a Wholehearted Advance or at a Worshiper Warrior event this fall, where there's going to be an opportunity for those of you guys who haven't. We've done them in the past since the road started, like once every other year or something. We get the opportunity to just reach guys and have them experience that, because there is something powerful that if you haven't experienced it, it's core to your DNA, it's core to your masculinity, and there's something that you guys have to hear in your hearts, and it answers all that question, and it's language that if you've been in the presence of the Father, you know how he's talking to you. You hear and you discern, and you're like, no, man, wait a minute. Dad was always accusing me. Dad was always ridiculing me, and he was harsh, and he was abrasive, and I didn't hear affirmation. I wasn't affirmed. I didn't feel loved. That's some of our stories. And so to hear what God the Father wants to say to our hearts, there's something so precious there. There's a quote here from Stephen James and David Thomas, both doctors in their fields, and it's a book titled Wild Things, The Art of Nurturing Boys. And this was one of the books that I read when I was creating and developing the process, but I love this quote and the value that we have right now, the value that I have in this program, and I think the value for rites of passage. It says, rituals, rites of passage, and initiations reach deep into the heart of a boy and touch what theologians call the imago Dei, or the image of God. It's the part of our humanity that bears the mark of God and speaks to our inherent value, independent of our utility or function. It's something we're born with, man. It's something we're born with. It's something our sons are born with. Your dads had it. Your grandfathers had it. You guys all have it right now. And there's young men and there's older men in your proximity, in your orbit, in your herd, if you will. We all get this. Here's the reality, though. There's passivity. And I was having lunch with a guy yesterday who actually has a tremendous influence on a certain platform. And if I said anything more, I'd be giving away too much just for his own discretion. But we were talking about, we're going through another book. I'm taking through a group of young guys going through, you guys read Mark Batterson a couple years ago. We did All In as a church, great writer, pastor up in New York. And we're going through his first book that he wrote, In a Pit with a Lion on a Snowy Day. And we're getting together and talking about that. But after we were done with kind of that material, I said, hey, how was your relationship with your dad, dude? He's like, oh, here we go. Like, where's the couch, dude? Like, no, seriously, like, tell me. And Dad's still alive? He's like, no, my dad was great. I grew up in a Christian home. My dad was around. I'm like, man, I hear that so much. My dad was around. He was a good guy. I said, was he intentional with your heart? No. We didn't really have deep conversations. I said, did you get what you needed from him in the area of, do you have courage? Are you brave? Do you feel like you're a man? And he goes, no, we didn't really. I mean, he took me hunting. He took me fishing. We hung out. We did the shoulder-to-shoulder thing. I said, you're like about every other guy I talk to, man. I said, that is the story of so many of us that, and I'm calling this passivity, guys. There's a passivity that we have, and if you're not fathers yet and you hope to be one day, just pay attention here. And for those of us that are fathers and even have adult kids, guys, I know some of the stories in this room, and I know your hearts for your kids, and it's beautiful hearts as dads. And then as grandfathers, the value that you guys have with the breadth of life experience, oh my gosh. I mean, it's such a rich, there's so much worth there that I actually struggle, and I get emotional talking about the amount of life that you guys have lived and what you have to pass on to those below. And it's just tremendous. And so it's a gift, so don't waste the gift. But I want to say that we struggle with passivity, guys. It's something that we inherited in the garden, and we all struggle with it. And sometimes maybe the greatest impact that it has is that we can be bulls, we can be lions in our careers and our focus, and we can go out there and take the world by the tail. But come on a home life, whether we're passive with our wives or we're passive with our kids, there's this passivity. There's this natural fear of, well, what can I really say to my son? What can I give him? I don't want to screw it up, so I may not say anything, and maybe we'll just let this thing work it out. So in the book, they go on to say that if you leave this process alone, if you don't intentionally initiate, if left alone, life will initiate boys to manhood by way of other peers, their friends, and other fatherless men in their lives. This is where we see gangs come into play, right? We see these young guys, young bulls, they don't know where to go, so they're going to go adopt in, and we see this in inner cities and in largely fatherless communities where they'll find a place to get fathered. They're going to go find the answers. They know they have an answer that needs they have a question that needs an answer, and they're going to go find it somewhere. Maybe it's not the right answer. So if you do this long enough, and in the same process, it is often too late or too imperceptible to have any real meaning for them or the truth of their core identity, and it leaves the lingering question on their hearts: am I strong enough, and can I do this? So many men have written books in that same line of questioning. Us as men are sitting here, and if we're being honest, probably are asking ourselves, even at our ages now, sometimes when we step into a task, when we step in to face a lion, is this the right answer? Do I have the courage? Do I have the bravery? Do I have the energy to take this on? But I'm going to challenge everybody here to say, this passivity thing that we have experienced, and I'm raising my hand because I've been guilty. I'm speaking to the mirror in this one, is that I don't want it. Our kids need something else. There are other students, other young people, young adults that need fathered, and I'm asking us as a community to step into it and embrace the culture at the road, whether it's through Worshiper Warrior and we're repairing guys versus preparing young men in the forge, and that's kind of what we've talked about. And listen, I've needed to repair as much as the next guy, so I get it. But I want to prepare the next generation. So real quick, personal story. I'll see where I'm at on time, because I promised you I'd be done soon. 20 minutes. I'm going to beat Steve's time. I'm going to land the plane in 3. Here we go. Junior high. My life falls apart. Really good herd, right? Core group, we're together, aunts, uncles, all the major events at Grandma and Grandpa's house, Thanksgiving, 4th of July, Christmas, extended family, cousins. Have a great time. Live out in Illinois, kind of out in the country by farmlands, acreage, fun. Played in the woods. I kind of had a Tom Sawyer existence kind of growing up, and it was a blast. There was always a bullfrog or a snake in my back pocket or something, dude, and it was awesome. It was awesome to be a boy. And I didn't realize what was on the horizon, and my life was about to be forever changed and wrecked, and that was my parents went through a process that would ultimately end in divorce. And so my dad, and I was sharing with you kind of that story of that other guy's dad. My dad was a good dad. He was loving, he was affectionate, but he became unavailable. Junior high, when him and my mom entered into their stuff, he wasn't checked in, and he didn't have the ability to intentionally initiate my heart and talk about the things that I was experiencing and the things that I wanted to know about. And I was getting really interested in his world. He used to invite me in when I was in elementary school, hey, come check, work on the cars. And he always had a car project going on. And I didn't have any interest. I was still in mom's world as an 8-year-old, 9-year-old. But then as I was starting to transition, I was like, yeah, Dad, let's build that Shelby Cobra kit. That was one of his dreams. I'm like, let's freaking do that. That'd be awesome. But he was like, and he just checked out. Life's trauma, life's crushing blow took Dad out of my life in that season. So I moved in with my grandparents. They lived proximately geographically close. I could run there in 2.5 minutes. And my granddad was an executive C-suite employee for John Deere. My whole family was John Deere. We grew up around tractors, farming. We had gardens. It was awesome. But I remember, and his backstory was, he actually was in World War II, forged his parents' signature, joined at 17, and was a frogman, and the birthplace of what we call today the Navy SEALs. And he was in Normandy, and he went in early, and he was blowing up the hedgehogs so they could get those landing craft onto the beach. But their job as frogmen were to go in, scuba dive in the night, and blow up those things that were trying to trap the landing crafts for the Army to get on the beach. And he had all these stories that he would share with me about his time there. And And it wasn't a big deal for him. He's just like, he's like, yeah, I got a German helmet one time, picked it up. There was still half a German in there, so I just kind of dumped it out and washed it in the river. I'm like, Grandpa. And so we'd sit down and talk with him and my cousins. He'd sit us all down. He'd say, listen, you guys quit screwing around because I can kill you with my thumb. And we believed him. We're like, Grandpa probably could kill us with his thumb. And we'd never seen that before. But he celebrated Chuck Norris before there was Chuck Norris slogans. And he was a cool guy. He was kind of that stoic figure in my life. And so I'm living in their house. I move in with them. Grandparents, my parents are kind of in rocks. And there's some stability there. I move in. Grandma was always for me, and we had a great relationship. But I remember, like, sometimes in the summertime, we'd be waking up, and the garden had been planted, and it was coming to life, and I'd be waking up, and I'd hear this, like, crack off, and they were like gunshots. And I'm going, oh, man, and I'd walk over, and sure enough, my grandfather's at his bathroom window, and he's, like, snipering, like, rabbits in his garden. He was such a steward of his garden. He's like, there's no vermin that's going to get in there and destroy my hard work. And so I started to learn something about masculinity there, and that is, we have gardens, and there's going to be things that want to get in there. And he started kind of, just by observation and process, I started to learn some things from him. And he always bought 2 tools. In case one broke, he always had a second. He wasn't going to let not having the right tool let him finish the job. So he was never not going to be prepared. So there was preparation. There was preservation of the garden. And I remember one time, I'm going to try to keep this one together because it still touches me pretty deep. So I was in middle school, and this next section is called Boxing Lessons and Bullies. I came home. I was sitting at the dinner table with them, and there had been this kid at school. We all have a kid at school, right? We either were that kid at school or we had a kid at school. And there was a kid at school, and he was a bigger kid, and he tuned me up in the bathroom when everybody had exited and was like we got into a fight. Actually, it wasn't much of a fight. He did most of the licks. But I remember coming home, and I was just, as a boy, trying to answer some questions. Like, I was defeated. Somebody got the best of me. I couldn't handle myself. And I was crushed, man. I was like, oh, my gosh. I was like, my grandfather, he can kill somebody with his thumb. And I just got wrecked in the bathroom. And and I had marks on my face. It was obvious I had been in a fight, And I'm going, oh, man. So I sit down at the dinner table, and I'm dodging glances. I don't want to see my grandma. I don't want to look at her. And I kind of just sit down, and I'm eating my food. And my grandfather doesn't say anything, but he notices. And so that weekend, he doesn't say anything. Like, I go to bed, and everybody's like, my grandma does come in, and she did notice it because she was, like, kind of tucking me in for bed. And she goes, oh, what happened? I said, oh, man, it was kind of a wild game of dodgeball or something. I made something up. But Grandpa knew. He knew. And so that Saturday morning, that week, so it was like Thursday or Friday or something. And so that weekend, he wakes me up early. We get breakfast. He's like, I want you to come with me. And so he takes me out back. And in the tree, he'd like made up this whole thing. And the day that this had happened, he had put a heavy bag up. He'd put a speed bag up, and he had like gotten sparring gloves and everything. And he goes, I don't know what happened this week, but it doesn't ever have to happen again. And he grabbed a hold of my heart, and he taught me something, and he gave me lessons. My grandpa was a Navy boxer, too, so he knew how to handle himself. And he taught me how to take care of myself moving forward, and it was a question that needed answered. And for that summer, or from the rest of that school year, every weekend, he'd spar with me in the backyard, and he'd put me on the speed bag. He's like, I want you to work on this and show you this. And so he'd put me like on those things for about an hour, and then he and I would work in the yard together, and he would teach me, how to move and take care of myself. And so the value of that in my life, the value of, and I am not unique, because I know there are guys in this room, your sons, yourselves, we've all had to ask those questions. And so today, gentlemen, I'll have some table discussions, and I want to get us to those right away. But one of my favorite quotes that I've used often in the forge and in the graduation ceremony is a quote by Richard Rohr. And it says, a truly initiated man lives inside a sacred universe of meaning among other men. And this process must be lived out with focused intentionality. We can't be passive in this. And so whether you have opportunities right in front of you to father guys, if you want fathered and mentored by other men that are just ahead of you, I mean, the process works like this at the road, and this is what we believe. I meet with other guys that pour into me, and right now I'm meeting with other men, and I'm pouring into these younger guys that are just this side of it, newlyweds with young kids, and have had the chance for the last 5 years to walk with dads and their sons, and to see something passed on, to see generational change where sons are receiving from their fathers the blessing, the I have what it takes stuff. You are my beloved son. Because before we can discipline our kids, before the father wants to discipline us, he wants us to know that we're his beloved. And have we given that to our sons? You know, do they know that they were once the apple of our eye and still are? That there's nothing they could say or do that would make us love them any less or more. Because as a father's heart, yeah, it can get broken. I understand that. I do. So I want to encourage you guys. This is precious to me. You guys have probably seen some of his handiwork, but I got this at graduation this year from Ricky Bobby. I had shared with him early on that I loved like gladiuses. It's my favorite design of a sword, and he presented this to me at our Forge graduation this year, and this thing is badass. So thank you, brother. And it reminds me to stay in the hunt for my son's heart, for the hearts of men, and that, you know, we can't take our hands off the wheel, guys. We have to be intentional, speaking life and truth into guys' hearts. And I'll leave this up here, but he put our 2 coins that you guys get when you come to our Worshiper Warrior events, the Encounter and the Whole Heart Advance. So I know a lot of love and sweat went into this. There's some other details that went into the blade. There's some meteorite in here, too, that came from another part of space. So that thing's sweet, man. So I'll leave it up here if you guys want to check that out. But it's a symbol to me whenever I see it, is that I want to be about the Father's business. You know, I want to be doing what I hear the Father doing or seen doing, and I want to say what the Father's saying. And so there's this invitation to all of us, and some of the questions I want you guys to go into as the table to questions is, are you guys creating space to hear from the Father? I have an alarm on my phone that goes off twice a day, once in the mid-morning, once in the mid-afternoon, and that's a pause for me to stop and check in with Dad. And I have to do that because life gets busy, and if I'm not stopping or putting an alarm on my phone, it'll go by quickly. And so it's just and sometimes I don't get to it. Sometimes I'm in the middle of something and I miss that afternoon appointment or that morning meeting with the Father. But he's always there. He's always waiting. He's like, well, I'll be here tomorrow. I'll be here whenever you got time for me. And so we can't give away what we haven't received, guys. So there's an invitation to that today. So thank you. And I'm going to put these up, these questions. I'm going to email them to Vern. Sorry, buddy, I meant to do that. And then you guys, I invite you into a time to kind of talk about, are you guys being consistent in experiencing the Father's love? And then I'll just put them up on the board instead of trying to remind him or say them to you so you don't remember, but then we'll have some background scores. So thank you, guys. Come check out the sword, and bless you guys today in that. And I just hope you guys have a good, rich table discussion. Make sure you save time for prayer with each other.